All right, welcome to the first real class lecture in the Crushing the Preclinical Years How to Study course. All right, so let's get to it, guys. This is the anatomy class lecture. So what can you expect in anatomy class? There's going to be some case situations. They'll present you questions of patient did this and this happened, and what nerve is involved, what muscle involved, what portion of the heart was involved, that kind of stuff. And then that darn brachial plexus thing. Oh my gosh, the brachial plexus is everybody's bane of existence in anatomy class. You can expect a lot of brachial plexus action. You can expect kind of interpreting muscle movements. If this happens, if this nerve fires, what movement happens? If this muscle does its main contraction, what happens distally? And then muscle innervations, knowing what nerve innervates which muscle. They might ask you, if the bicep flexes, then what nerve is that? If the deltoid flexes in your arm's abduct, what nerve does that? If you lose sensation over the lateral deltoid, which nerve is that? And then embryo origins. So just for clarification, I won't go over kind of all the muscle movements, all the muscle innervations. I'm talking about the things you can expect to see in class. And these are essentially the important things to focus on. So what I'm saying is, if you start to think about anatomy in a case presentation situation, if you understand the brachial plexus, and I don't know if anybody really ever understands that thing, but if you study it and you know it well, if you understand muscle movements, if I say my quadriceps flexes and you understand what happens distally, you understand what happens proximally, then you're going to be good. If you understand muscle innervations, muscle nerve innervations, if you know that which nerve is on the outside of the leg creates the sensation, if you know that lateral femoral cutaneous syndrome, if you know that the axillary nerve provides sensation and whatnot to the deltoid muscle, if you know these things, those are the important things for anatomy. Okay, I'm not going to go over those things. I'm not going to tell you which nerves innervate the muscles. There's so many resources for that out there, and I'll tell you those resources. I'll tell you which ones are great, but I'm not going to go over that with you because I feel like that's recreating the will, right? Why would I make more lectures on the things that are already out there? But what I'm telling you is what to focus on so you can do well in anatomy. So some helpful anatomy resources. All right, UMich right up here, University of Michigan, has this fantastic YouTube channel that you should absolutely use. And then, I don't know if you guys can click here or not, but BRS Anatomy, that is a fantastic resource, and then Netter's Atlas. These are incredibly helpful resources for anatomy class. So BRS Anatomy is its board review series. It goes through and it does those case presentations. It kind of tells you what's important for boards. It kind of tells you the highlights of anatomy class. And at the end of every single section, there is a bunch of questions that are in case presentation style. So at the end of every, if you're studying the upper limb, at the end of that block of studying an anatomy class, go through and do the questions at the end of the BRS chapter for upper limb. And you will, if you can do those questions, you're going to be ready for your block exam. And then same thing with Netter's Atlas. This is a great one to use when studying at home. I recommend a different one for lab, and we'll get to that, but I highly recommend Netter's Atlas for studying for anatomy class. It is so detailed. The drawings are great. It's not as good for lab because it's drawings. There's another one that's better for lab, and I'll just tell you that in that lecture. But for class, there's no better than the Netter's Atlas of Anatomy. So you guys, you should be able to click on, so you can click on that and go there and see on Amazon. So that's a fantastic option to have, to just be able to click that and go over there. So click BRS Anatomy, click Netter's Atlas, go over to Amazon, pick yourself up a copy, and then make sure you bookmark this University of Michigan YouTube channel. So case presentations, let's break each one of these things down now. You want to focus on the function of the muscles, right? The muscle fibers. You want to know what every single muscle does, because a lot of the times they will, we'll talk about an example down here, but a lot of the times the case presentations are patient did this movement, what muscle was that? Simple things like that, that if you know it, you're going to get those points. Then know what nerves innervate the muscles. This is another important thing, and we'll talk about this down in with the example below. But that's really a big, huge chunk of anatomy, is knowing the muscles and knowing which nerves innervate it, because that's how they attack these questions. They say, there was somebody got stabbed right here, and that's about where the axillary nerve is. What muscle's going to be problematic, right? What muscle's not going to function fully, um, and that kind of stuff. So there are some great examples in that BRS anatomy book. Guys, you really should get that book. That book will go through a bunch of case presentations. It will go through the important information in each chapter. That book is, in my opinion, one of the big secrets to doing well in anatomy in medical school. So just kind of reviewing this slide, know what the muscles do, right? If you know the orientation of the fibers, you know what the muscle does. Um, if you follow the orientation of the fibers, that's the action the muscle is going to take. So like when you dissect a bicep, right, and you look at the bicep muscle, those orientation of those fibers are running between the shoulder and the elbow. You know that's the direction they're going to contract, right? Muscles only contract the direction the fibers are running. They don't contract any other way. That's how they contract. And so if you know the orientation of the fibers, and you know that pretty well from anatomy class, or just think about where the muscle's at and kind of the main action of it, if you know the orientation, you'll always know the action of the muscle. Know what nerves innervate it. I cannot stress nerve innervation to muscles enough. That will be on your tests, and you will get plenty of questions about that. And that's where the BRS book comes in handy. That goes over that in detail. You get questions on it. You get practice questions on it. So a great example is scapular winging, right? This is a famous example. A lot of people like to ask it on their block exams, and it's a fantastic example because it goes through kind of what we need to know. So if we look at scapular winging, okay, and they give you this picture of this patient pushing up against a wall, and one of the scapulas is pushing out. They'll say, what nerve was damaged here? The long thoracic nerve. Or they'll say the serratus anterior innervated by blank nerve caused this injury, right? The long thoracic nerve innervates the serratus anterior muscle. So if you can start to associate the serratus anterior with the long thoracic with scapular winging, they can ask that question in any way they want, and what you know the information there. They can ask it whatever way they want, and you're going to get it right. So that's why it's so important to know the nerve, to know the muscle, and to know the action, right? If you associate those three things together, you'll always be able to get those questions right, no matter what they ask you, no matter how they ask you, right? They can ask you any way about scapular winging, but you know that the long thoracic nerve innervates the serratus anterior, and if that goes away, you get scapular winging, right? If you know those things, then you're golden. And that's how you should focus on every nerve and every muscle in the body. You know which nerve innervates it, you know what muscle it is, and you know what action it does. And so if it becomes damaged and it doesn't do that action anymore, it's doing the opposite action, right? And that's a great way to study anatomy, and that's one of the secrets, guys. So get that BRS anatomy book, because that's how it does it. So everyone's favorite thing, the brachial plexus. Oh my gosh. There's a secret, not a secret. I shouldn't say that. That sounds like I'm trying to sell you something, but this course is free. There is an easy way to do this, guys. If you just draw the brachial plexus over and over and over, it comes back to that 10,000 hour principle, guys. If you do something a bunch, you're going to memorize it. You're going to know it. Just draw it over and over and over. And this video here, if you click that link, you can go watch that video. That has a fantastic mnemonic in it. And that's how you'll remember kind of the portions of the brachial plexus. And I can't even remember the mnemonic. I can't remember the brachial plexus, right? So we talk about classes versus boards versus real life. I don't remember the brachial plexus, and I'm doing just fine in residency. There's a ton of other videos on YouTube that if this one doesn't do it for you, find some others that will. Essentially, you need to watch that video, draw it over and over and over again. Know the terminal location of the nerves for the plexus. Like I said, if you know which nerves innervate which muscles, you're golden. Same thing with the brachial plexus. If you know where those nerves go and what they innervate, kind of at the terminal end of them, then you're going to be good. So literally the best way to learn the brachial plexus, you guys, watch a video. Watch this one on YouTube up here. If that one doesn't jive with you, watch a different one. There's tons of them on YouTube. Learn the mnemonic that they present and draw it over and over and over again. And when test day comes, that'll be so ingrained in your brain that you can't forget this brachial plexus thing. Muscle movements. We've been over this a few times already. If you know the attachments and the insertion, and you know the orientation of the muscle's fibers, that will all be such a game changer for you. Okay, knowing the attachment and insertion. There will be some questions about attachments and insertions. Origins and insertions. You don't have to know them perfectly, but if you know the gist of where that muscle starts and where it ends, all the bones that it attaches to, and then you know the orientation of the fibers, you can't get a muscle movement question wrong, right? If you know those things, all you have to do is think about it, right? Put your mind in a thought process and think about it. And if you can't think about those things, seriously, you have a cheat sheet. You have your body right there on test day. So if they're asking about, the quadratus lumborum muscle, flex your little quadratus lumborum and see what happens. If they're talking about the quadriceps or the gastrocnemius, flex those muscles and see what happens. If you know the orientation of fibers and you know attachments and insertions or origins and insertions of muscles, then you're going to be golden and you'll know muscle movements. So we talked about innervations, counter muscles. Counter muscles are important. So like the chest and the back, those would be counter muscles. If my chest flexes, my back has to relax because that pulls my shoulders forward. If my quadriceps flex, my hamstrings have to relax because it pulls them forward and it stretches them. And that'll present a lot in questions. And so if you get a damage to a nerve that fires the quadriceps, okay, and now that's not firing as much, you're going to get lengthening of the quadriceps and shortening of the hamstrings because the muscle, the counter muscle is firing and the counter muscle is contracting. And that's how a lot of these questions will come at you. So know the counter muscles, and the counter muscles are just the muscles that do the opposite action of what you're looking at. All right, so if you're thinking about the quadriceps, the counter muscle is the hamstrings. And that's how a lot of questions will present themselves, right? Another example is the biceps and the triceps. The biceps flexes, the triceps extends at the elbow. If you know those things, you know what the counter muscles are, you know the main actions of all the muscles in that area, you're going to be fine, right? That's not going to be a huge issue. You're going to be just fine. And another thing, like I mentioned earlier, you have that cheat sheet. If you visualize that contraction on yourself, or you think about what the bicep does, what the gastrocnemius does, if you think about those things, that'll tell you the function of the muscle, right? You don't have to memorize every single piece of that because you have a cheat sheet, right? So thinking about the function of the muscle, the actual contraction of the muscle, this is a good video just to watch on kind of contractions of muscles and how to think about it. But really, for muscle movements, if you know where the muscle's at, you know where it starts, you know where it ends, you know what innervates it, it's pretty easy to start to think about the movement of that muscle. And then always remember counter muscles. This is something that, it might surprise you on test day if you don't think about it beforehand. It comes at you on block exams, it comes at you on boards. Counter muscles are important. These are just the opposite action of what you're thinking about. So if the question is asking you about the bicep, the counter muscle is the tricep. If the question is asking you about damage to the bicep and saying what muscle is now firing, causing the bicep to stretch because the bicep's not firing, then it's the tricep. This comes up a lot in movements of the tongue, right? If you stick the tongue out and now it's deviating left, that tells you that the left muscle is not firing, it's not functioning, and so the right muscle is overtaking it and the right muscle is pushing the tongue out. Or same thing with the eyes, right? The eyes are another great example. If your right eye is turned inward, that tells you that that muscle's weak, the other muscle's weak, right? So if your right eye is turned inward, then the muscle that pulls that eye inward is the one that's fine, but the muscle on the outside is not, right? So that muscle on the outside is not doing its job because that one should hold it in place and keep the eye looking straight. And so knowing the counter muscles, knowing which muscles do what is so important. Muscle innervations. You got to know what nerves innervate which muscles. You'll get questions about it. Big ones to know are the brachial plexus, the serratus anterior, we talked about that, and then the larger muscles of the legs, right? Know where the nerves come through the pelvis to innervate the muscles of the leg. Right? So I mean that covers the big things, right? Know the upper extremity and the brachial plexus, know the lower extremities, and know the serratus anterior, right? Those are so important to know. Embryology, this is kind of bonus point stuff. It's not an absolute, but it can make a difference. Most students don't really learn this. It's pretty tough to remember. Um, if you have time and you feel like you want some extra points, then by all means learn it. Um, I really didn't spend a lot of time on embryology, and I was in the top 10 of my class, and I got greater than 97th percentile on boards. And so if that tells you anything, how important it is, do with that what you will. Um, I wouldn't focus a whole lot on it because it takes the attention away from the important things. So kind of in summary, know the innervations, know the actions of the muscles, know the brachial plexus. Go back and use some of those resources. I would highly recommend that you get BRS Anatomy, that you get Netter's Atlas of Anatomy, and that you go through BRS for your class lectures, right? So use that alongside, if you're talking about upper limb, go through the upper limb section and do those questions at the end. It is a fantastic resource and one that you should definitely use. So in the next lecture, we'll talk about Anatomy Lab, so be sure to watch that one. Okay, thanks.